Hello everybody, it is time to talk about some new cards because the set is finally here and boy am I excited for this one. Today I have 20 cards that we're going to go over here, 10 honorable mentions as well as my top 10 picks for the set. Now, not necessarily one format specifically. Typically in the past I have pretty much solely focused on Pioneer and Modern, but with my recent foray into Standard, I actually have some pretty good picks for Standard too. So again, we're going to start with the honorable mentions first, and the first honorable mention that I'm going to go ahead and put up on your screen here is Delny Streetwise Lookout. This is 2 and white for a 2/2. It says creatures you control with power 2 or less can't be blocked by creatures with power 3 or greater, and if an ability of a creature you control with power 2 or less triggers, that ability triggers an additional time. Now, what are we specifically looking to double up on? Well, in the past, Modern has seen some success with humans decks, Thalia's Lieutenant, Reflector Mage, Imperial Recruiter, things of that nature that have a lot of good enter the battlefield abilities, and those are all fairly decent to double up on with Delny. And the fact that this is a human means that it kind of slots right into your curve. You have caverns and territories and other things that trigger humans like Lieutenant and things like that. Now, I understand that Fury has been banned from Modern, but the problem is Orcish Bowmasters still exists and is one of the most played cards. Is this going to make humans a thing in Modern again? Well, a lot of people said that with the banning of Fury, so the answer to that question is probably no, but I likely will give it a shot, and we'll see how it goes. Second card that I want to put up here on your screen, honorable mention number 2, Unyielding Gatekeeper. So this one's got a lot of text on it, but it is a 2-mana 3/2 with Disguise for 1 and a white, which is essentially the new morph mechanic. So you can play it face down as for 3 colorless for a 2/2 with Ward 2, and then you can turn it face up for its disguise cost at any time. When it's turned face up, you exile another target non-land permanent. If you controlled it, return it to the battlefield tapped. Otherwise, its controller creates a 2/2 white and blue detective. So this card is, first of all, the stats on it, not that bad. 2 mana for a 3/2. People play Mosswood Dread Knight in Standard, and that's totally fine. I'm thinking of this mostly as a Pioneer and or Standard application. And, the fact that it's a little flexible in regards to you can exile your opponent's permanent and give them a 2/2. Most of the time, their permanents are probably better than a random 2/2. Think Shieldred the Apocalypse, Archfiend of the Dross, Preacher of the Schism, especially in Standard. I don't know if this is quite going to make it to Pioneer because it's likely worse than Skyclave Apparition, and that card is kind of already on the decline. But I could definitely see it in Standard, and there are some creatures in Standard that you want to flicker that have enter the battlefield abilities. It's also cool that you can sort of protect your creature from removal, where if they go to kill, say, a Lord or something, or, if you have an Adeline, because that card is played in Standard, you can flip this to flicker your Adeline and kind of counter their removal spell. So it has a little bit of flexibility. I don't know if it's quite going to get there, but the stats are decent enough that I could definitely see it play. Words. Axebane Ferox is our next honorable mention. It's 2 green for a 4/4 with Death Touch and Haste, and it has a ward cost of Collect Evidence 4. So essentially what this means is that in order for your opponent to target this thing, they have to remove cards in their graveyard that equal or are greater than mana value 4. So we've seen 4 mana green creatures with haste have some moderate success in the past. Questing Beast is kind of the one that comes to mind, the most recent one that comes to mind. And this card, while doesn't necessarily have the extensive text box that Questing Beast has, still don't even know all of the abilities on it. I wouldn't be surprised if Questing Beast had reach. But what this does do is it gives you a little bit of insurance, where if you catch your opponent tapped out, you can hit them for 4, and then it's not even clear that they're going to have any, they may have some cards in their graveyard, but maybe they don't have the full 4 mana's worth to be able to kill this, like if they have Go for the Throat. So what's cool is that even if they have 2 removal spells in hand, they have to use one of their removal spells on your weaker creature to get enough mana value in the graveyard to be able to kill your better creature. And that means they're trading a removal spell for a card they don't necessarily want to. And that's cool. I think that has potential. If there was some sort of like aggressive green deck, maybe like a green-red aggressive deck with Reckless Stormseeker in Standard, probably won't quite make it to Pioneer. This one's mostly for Standard. Next one up here, honorable mention, is Fugitive Codebreaker. This is 2/1 Prowess Haste for 2, and then you can disguise for 6 mana, 5 and a red, but it costs 1 less for each instant and sorcery in your graveyard, and when you flip it up, discard your hand, then draw 3 cards. So this one's tough because there is a card that Prowess decks play now, and it's actually kind of a point of contention whether Prowess should play this card or not, and that is Sprite Dragon, which is 2 mana, 1/1, flying haste, and basically it has prowess, but it's permanent prowess. And the question you have to ask yourself is, if you want a 2-drop, is this card better than Sprite Dragon? I think the answer is no, because the permanent pump from Sprite Dragon, I would think is better than the upside of morphing and flipping this up, because you have to spend 3 mana on it. So even if you have 5 spells in your graveyard, it's still a 4 mana play, right? Even if you're getting the full discount, you pay 3 for the morph and then 1 red to flip it up. Is that good? Maybe. It's not that hard to have a bunch of instants and sorceries in your graveyard in your prowess deck with lava darts, mutagenic growths, etc., etc. But, you know, I think the permanent pump is probably a little bit better, but I'm sure I'll test this one out at some point in Modern. Sharp-Eyed Rookie is the next one up on the list. It is a 2/2 Vigilance for a green and a colorless. It says whenever a creature enters the battlefield, if its power is greater than its or its toughness is greater than its, put a counter on it and investigate. Now, I did a video a couple of weeks back with kind of like the initial spoilers, and this was in that video. And I kind of talked about how whenever the new set comes out, I do a quick Scryfall search for cards that reference +1/+1 counters to combine with Hardened Scales, and this is the Hardened Scales bait of the set for me. It's kind of funny because every single time it's never good enough, but I always tell myself that it's going to be good enough, so maybe it's good enough this time, but I'm probably just coping with that. I think the cool thing about this card is it has Vigilance, so if you can make it big, it plays offense and defense, and it provides you additional game objects. But it's not clear that the Scales deck in question is well utilized, or is well equipped to utilize those game objects, is what I'm trying to say. So we'll have to see with this one. I'll probably try it. It'll probably be bad, but I gotta get through it at one point. Case of the Gorgons Kiss is the next one up on our list. This one is mostly for Standard. So the cases, if you haven't seen these, they're a bit strange if you're new to this keyword or this card type. They do look a little bit like sagas, but essentially you go, so the first text box or first paragraph, whatever you want to call it. So ETBs, you destroy up to 1 creature that was dealt damage this turn. That's ETBs, that's it. And then the second level is if you solve the case. So in order to solve it, you have to have 3 or more creature cards put into graveyards from anywhere this turn. That word anywhere is very important on this card. And then once you solve it, you just have the third ability permanently, which makes it a 4/4 Death Touch lifelink. So what this card basically is, the first ability maybe comes up, maybe doesn't, where you destroy up to 1 creature that was dealt damage. You can make some kind of chump attacks with maybe your smaller creatures. If they choose to block, then you get to blow up their bigger thing. That's cool. And then the solving it, 3 or more creature cards were put into graveyards from anywhere, which means that if you discard or mill over creatures, that will flip the case of the Gorgons Kiss. And surprisingly, that's not that hard to do, especially in Standard where you have Fairy Dream Thief, 1 mana 1/1 Surveil 1, Blood Tithe Harvester goes to the graveyard naturally, Voldaren Epicure can create a blood to make you discard a creature card, Inti discards cards, so there are plenty of ways to put things into the graveyard, and the Standard decks that I've been playing recently have been severely lacking 1 mana plays. Now, this isn't an aggressive 1 mana play because it doesn't get turned on till later in the game, but I think it has a lot of potential with kind of that core of Inti Harvester and potentially the Fairy Dream Thief. So keep this one in the back burner. Not going to spend a lot of time on this one. This is Long Goodbye. It's pretty self-explanatory. It's 2 mana, can't be countered, destroy creature, planeswalker with mana value 3 or less. It does what it does very well. It's good against counter spells, kills creatures, planeswalkers that cost 3 or less. Anyways, I just wanted to put it on here because it's a good card. I don't need to tell you why it's a good card, but it's a good card. Kylox's Volt Strider is our next honorable mention here. This is a bit of a strange one. So, it is a vehicle. Mana cost of 3, blue-red colorless for a 4/4. It has crew 2, so you can just tap up 2-power creature to crew it. But you can also crew it by collecting Evidence 6, which is exiling cards from your graveyard with mana value 6 or more. And whenever it attacks, you can cast an instant or sorcery spell from among cards exiled with it. If that spell would be put into a graveyard, put it on the bottom of its owner's library instead. So, an example of this is if you have a treasure cruise in your graveyard. So I'm thinking about this for Pioneer mostly. If you have a cruise in your graveyard, you can exile 1 cruise because it has mana value 8, make this thing a 4/4, attack, cast the cruise. Now, the one important part about this is the line of text that says, you may cast an instant or sorcery spell from among cards exiled with it, period. Does not say without paying its mana cost. So I actually misread this the first time, a couple weeks ago when I first saw it. Even after understanding that you can't cast the spell for free, I think it's still really good, because if you have a stocked graveyard, you can likely cast a cruise for 1 mana anyways, so you're still getting a pretty big discount, and it's just more, you're just like generating more cards off of it. If you're milling over a cruise with, an Otherworldly Gaze or pieces of the puzzle, or your cruise gets discarded, I think it might give the Phoenix decks a different angle of attack. It's awkward because it still uses the graveyard, right? Because if they have Layline, then you can't collect evidence to turn this thing on, but you can still crew it with a 2-power Shredder, maybe a Fable, so I don't know. Interesting card. It's got a lot of applications. Could definitely see it being a potential player. Next one up here is Ione Center of the Web. This one, I will say specifically, I think this only has applications in Standard, but I do think it's quite good in Standard. So, 6 mana for a 5/4 menace. When it enters the battlefield or attacks, tell me if you've heard that line of text before, you may collect Evidence 4, and if you do, you make 2 2/1 black and green spider to your creature tokens with menace and reach, and you can sacrifice 4 tokens, surveil 2, draw 2, gain 2. So, the Golgari decks in Standard, it's kind of weird because they are, I think, supposedly favored in the mid-range, like, heads-up fights, but what this provides you is just reach blockers. So later in the game, if your opponent has, like, I guess it's not great against Archfiend, but, like, Rafine or Fairy Mastermind, there's a lot of, what ends up happening with the Golgari deck is you get into these board stalls where neither player really has profitable attacks. They both have Preachers, and Preacher is a good blocker. So the way that the mirror decks punch through is with Flyers, and this card is good against Flyers. You're not really... Collecting evidence is pretty easy in the Golgari deck in my experience, so that is pretty straightforward. If your Golgari midrange deck wants a top end, I think this one's pretty good. I could also maybe see just playing, like, I don't know, Sultai or Jund, some sort of ramp deck with this, because if you can ramp it out on turn 4, I mean, who's really beating... On turn 4 in Standard, who's beating a 5/4 and 2 2/1s? That just makes more 2/1s when it attacks. That seems really powerful, so I'm going to try this one a lot in Standard, I think. And then our last honorable mention here is going to be War Leader's Call. This is another card that I mentioned in that initial video a couple weeks prior. It's a 3-mana enchantment, gives all your creatures +1/+1, and whenever a creature enters the battlefield under your control, deals 1 damage to each opponent. I think this card is quite good with Gleeful Demolition because it allows you to, you get 3 2/2s and deal them 3 damage. That's a lot. And I also just think it's a good way for the Convoke decks in both Standard and Pioneer to help close out games. A lot of what happens is, you get your opponent to some low life total, 5 or 6, and they end up wrathing you, and your other smaller creatures that are follow-ups are just a bunch of 1/1s. But if those creatures are now 2/2s that come with a damage, you can really just, you know, the threat of killing your opponent after a Wrath is so much easier when you have this in play. So keep this in mind. Again, you're not going to want to play a ton of copies, but I could see 1 or 2 in the Convoke decks in both Standard and Pioneer. And now, the moment you've all been waiting for. I don't know why I did that voice. Anyways, top 10. Let's get right into it. Number 10 is going to be Reenact the Crime. This is, I think, going to be quite a good one for Modern. It's 3 blue and a colorless, so a little bit hard to cast. And it says, exile a non-land card in a graveyard that was put there from anywhere this turn. Copy it. You may cast the copy without paying its mana cost. Man, that without paying its mana cost seems to be a pretty common theme for busted Modern cards these days. But what I could see this being really good with is the obvious Emrakul, the Eon's Torn, and Omniscience. So the awkward part about Emrakul is it has that line of text where it says when it's put into a graveyard, you shuffle it in, but because this is an instant, if you can put the Emrakul into your graveyard, you can respond to the Emrakul trigger and just cast this and have a 4-mana Emrakul. Seems pretty good. There are plenty of ways to discard for free in Modern. Underworld Cookbook, Fable of the Mirror Breaker, maybe Voldaren Epicure. There is Insolent Neonate, and those are the ones that come to mind. I'm sure there's other ones that, you know, let me know in the comments. But yeah, this card just seems like really good as like a sort of a blue Gorgons Vengeance that also gets Omniscience. So if your Emrakul gets stuck in your hand, like if you have, I guess if your hand is Emrakul Omniscience, then you could just get the Emrakul anyways, but you could also do like Omniscience Gristlebrand or something like that. Or, I don't know, it just like, it gives you some flexibility in the Gorgons Vengeance deck, so definitely going to try this one in Modern, even though, you know, it would require me to play Modern, which, for lack of a better term, is not something that's on my my radar, but I will play this at some point for sure. Number 9, Forensic Researcher. This is kind of an innocuous one. I don't think I've heard a lot of people talking about this, but it's 2 and a blue for a 1/3. It says tap, untap another target permanent you control, or you can tap Collect Evidence 3 to tap a creature you don't control. So this, if you have 2 of them in play, okay, so you have 2 of them in play, and maybe, perhaps, the third combo piece, a Deep-Root Pilgrimage. Notably, all of these cards are legal in Standard, so this one is definitely for Standard and Pioneer only. Probably not Modern. You already have some stuff like this in Modern. But if you have 2 of these with Deep-Root Pilgrimage, you tap one, untap the other one, untap the one that you just untapped, or tap the one that you just untapped to untap the other one. You see where this is going. You make infinite 1/1 blue hexproof Merfolk creature tokens. I think there's enough Merfolks in Standard to make kind of a Merfolk theme deck where you have like Voltalion Hexcatcher is legal, you have some 1-drops like Cenote Scout, Deep-Root Wayfinder can be good, so there might be enough Merfolk in Standard now, and especially now that you have this infinite combo, so keep that in mind. Let's get to number 8, which is Analyze the Pollen. It's green for a sorcery. As an additional cost to cast this, you can collect evidence 8. 8's kind of a big number. Search your library for a basic land card. If you collected evidence, instead you get a creature or land card, reveal it, put it into your hand, then shuffle. So very similar to Traverse the Ulvenwald. Now the question you have to ask yourself with Analyze the Pollen is collecting evidence 8 easier to achieve than getting Delirium? For some decks, the answer is yes. For others, maybe no. But it works very well with the expensive cyclers, so the Lord of the Rings ones like Troll of Khazad-dûm, Oliphant, Generous Ent, and then Street Wraith as well is another big one. So basically with any combination of 2 of those, then you just immediately turn on Analyze the Pollen, as opposed to needing 4 cards with different types. So I think this is, I'm not going to say strictly better than Traverse, but for the most part, I think it will be better than Traverse. Now, the other question is Traverse playable in 2024 Modern? That's a different question to answer, and I don't know if that's true. But if Traverse is playable, this card will definitely see play. I can tell you that for sure. We are at, I can't count here, 10, 9, 8. This is number 7, right? 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. I can count. Novice Inspector is number 7 here. This is Thraben Inspector. If you've seen Thraben Inspector, this is just the same card. Now, why is that important? Well, it's only really important for one format, and that's Standard, because Pioneer and Modern already have Thraben Inspector. But there have been Boros Convoke decks that have been popping up recently in Standard, and I've been liking those decks as well. And now that we have a couple new tools with this and the aforementioned War Leader's Call, I could definitely see this deck getting a pretty significant upgrade, because that deck really was lacking some 1-drops. And now, in Standard, you have basically Thraben Inspector plus Epicure plus Warden. You essentially just have the entire core plus Gleeful Demolition. You essentially have the entire core of 1-drops that the Pioneer Convoke deck has. I mean, at this point, you have everything in Standard. The only thing you don't have is the second Convoke creature, right? You basically have everything else. So be on the lookout for this one. It's pretty innocuous, but I think it could definitely be very, very good in Standard. Number 6 here, Breakout. This is red-green. It's a lot of words, but red-green for a sorcery. You look at the top 6 cards of your library. You may reveal a creature from among them. If that card has mana value 2 or less, you can put it onto the battlefield and give it haste until end of turn. And if you didn't put the card revealed onto the battlefield, put it into your hand. So it's essentially, you just look at the top 6, get a creature. If it's 2 or less, you put it right into play and give it haste. That's a lot. Now, the format that I'm looking at this card in specifically is Pioneer. So there have been maybe not even necessarily recently, but there's been the Rona, Rona combo deck. It's like Rona, Kinnan, sometimes Jace Friend's Prodigy. There's a couple other 2-drops in that deck, but it's utilizing a lot of powerful 2-drops that most of the time get haste from Tyvar. So what this allows you to do, it gives you some consistency on finding your Rona or your Kinnan, whatever combo piece you're missing at that time, and it also gives it haste, just like Tyvar does. So it seems pretty powerful, and even if you're playing a deck that has 3+ mana creatures as part of the combo, you still just get to look at 6 cards and put the best creature into your hand, whatever piece you're missing, even if that costs 3 or more. So be on the lookout for this one. The Pioneer Pro Tour is actually coming up pretty soon in Chicago, and I would not be surprised to see this be one of the breakout cards from that event.
Move this man!
Getting into our top 5 here. Top 5. Number 5, I mean, you know, I really, really hate to put this card on the list, but, you know, we have to talk about it. We have to give credit where credit's due. Normalize, I'm sure you've seen this card. If you've looked at any sort of spoilers or anything regarding specifically Pioneer and Standard, blue-white, instant, counter target spell, unless its controller pays 3. If that spell is countered this way, exile it. Everybody said they would never give us Mana Leak in Pioneer. Well, here you go. We now have Mana Leak in Pioneer. Did you really want Mana Leak in Pioneer? I don't know if you did. Maybe the control mages did. A lot of people are going to play this. I'm going to be frustrated playing against it because I hate playing against Blue-White and Pioneer. I'm sure you guys know that by now if you've watched any of my Pioneer videos. But yeah, this card is ridiculous. It's Mana Leak. I don't know what else to say. Obviously, you can't play it in... I mean, I guess there's like maybe Esper or Jeskai control, but you have to be playing Blue-White to play this, so it's not even like you can splash it in your Blue-Black control deck. Maybe you could, but you probably would just play some other 2-mana counterspell at that point. But yeah, it's good. I don't know what else to say about it. It's the best counterspell that we've seen in a long time. End of story. That's all I got. Moving on to number 4. Number 4 here, Doorkeeper Thra. So this one, I think, is going to make a huge impact in Modern specifically. Maybe Pioneer, but definitely Modern. This is 2 mana for a 1/2 flash flying, and it says artifacts and creatures entering the battlefield don't cause abilities to trigger. So this is kind of massive because there's so many things in Modern that have enter the battlefield triggers. Orcish Bowmasters, Grief, Primeval Titan, trying to think of what else. Like this even stops your opponent, like if they have Sigarda's Aid and they play Colossus Hammer, it's an artifact entering the battlefield, so this also stops that. There's just like an endless list of things that this stops, and the most important part is that it has flash, right? So there's maybe some other stuff that stops ETB abilities, but those don't have flash, so they're face up on the battlefield. And now, if you're holding up 2 mana, and your opponent is like, well, do I go for this Primeval Titan? It's a lot more sketchy for them to go for that into 2 mana because this card now exists. It's really only going to be a sideboard card. I don't really think you would ever want to main deck this in any capacity, but it is going to be a very, very good sideboard card at that. So make sure that you are on the lookout for this one if you're playing a deck that would be affected by it, which, to be fair, is most of them. So, well, now that I'm saying that, maybe it is a main deck card. Probably not, though. Okay, top 3. Now, before we get into our top 3, we've gone through, if you've watched the entire video up to this point, let me know in the comment section down below, what do you think is going to make the top 3? 3, 2, 1, let's go ahead and do it. So, number 3, I had kind of a tough time arranging these 3 cards, but I'm going to start with number 3, which is Insidious Roots. Now, I'm sure a lot of you people probably expected this to be number 1, and I think this card, not to say that this card is not completely busted, because I think it is. Let's go ahead and read the card real quick. So it is black and a green for an enchantment. It says creature tokens you control have tap, add 1 mana of any color, and whenever 1 or more creature cards leave your graveyard, you make an 0/1 plant, then put a counter on each plant you control. So, 1 or more creatures leaving your graveyard. The 2, I guess, well, the 3 most common ways that you're probably going to see this utilized with is Cauldron Familiar and Witch's Oven, because Cauldron Familiar is leaving your graveyard when it comes back. This works with Oval Chase Daredevil and Underworld Cookbook, because the Daredevil is, again, leaving your graveyard when it goes back to your hand. And the third ability is just Undying. So it works with Stranglerootgeist and Young Wolf. Stranglerootgeist and Young Wolf. So those are kind of the 3 biggest applications, and that means that this card has applications in probably Pioneer and Modern, and I haven't quite done the deep dive to see if there's anything notably that it works with in Standard. I'll have to do a bit of a some more research on that. But yeah, let me know in the comments if there's anything that this works with in Standard, because maybe I'm missing something. But what's really important about this, specifically with the Yawgmoth activation, the Yawgmoth example rather, is it puts counters on your plants. Now, putting counters on creatures that don't have counters on them is extremely important and useful with Agatha's Soul Cauldron, because if you have Agatha's Soul Cauldron with a Grist under it, then all of your creatures with counters now are Grists, and if this thing is churning out plants that's putting counters on plants, it makes your top deck Cauldrons a lot better. And then, again, the application with Asmo and Daredevil, just giving you more material to work with. Those decks probably also want to play Cauldron, because Cauldron works very well with Asmo, and there's just so many different things that you can do with this. And then on top of all that, it just accelerates your mana. It just does everything. It accelerates your mana, fixes your mana. Yeah, this card is crazy, and I will be playing quite a bit with it in, like I said, most likely Modern and Pioneer. Maybe I'll try and find something for Standard. Number 2, again, had a bit of a tough time ordering number 1 and number 2, but number 2, I'm going to go ahead and go with Ansrog the Quake Mole. So this is 2, a red, and a green for an 8/4, kind of a weird stat line. And when it becomes blocked, untap each creature you control. After this combat phase, there is an additional combat phase. And you can pay 7 mana. Ansrog must be blocked each combat this turn if able. Now, that second line of text can mostly be ignored, right? Sometimes it's going to come up if you flood out, maybe that happens. But what's ridiculous about this card is just imagine a scenario where you play this. Okay, maybe you accelerated with an elf, maybe you don't. But you have this in play, and your opponent has a couple blockers. And you play a Voldaren Thrillseeker. You put 2 counters onto your Ansrog. It's now a 10/6, okay? It's a 10-6 that you can sacrifice it to deal 10 damage to your opponent, excuse me. So you attack with your 10-6, right? They have two options, even if they have multiple blockers in play. Option number one is take 10, and then they die, because post-combat you can just throw it at them for 10 damage. And option number two is they block. But what happens if they block? You get it to attack with it again, and then you can just put them into the same position. So, I don't know, this card just seems so ridiculous for... There's not a ton of decks that it will go into, but specifically the Gruul Vehicles deck in Pioneer, this card seems obscene in that deck. You have the Thrill Seeker interaction. It's also just a ridiculous card to give haste with Reckless Stormseeker, where you just get to go like turn 3 Stormseeker, turn 4 play this, make it the a 9 power creature, hit with it. If they have if they have a blocker, they chump block, but then you get to attack with it again and your Stormseeker. It's just like God, this card seems so ridiculous. And this card alone is going to get me back into Pioneer. Now, again, arguments, dies to Fatal Push, I get it. But hey, Shieldred also dies to Fatal Push, and it's one of the best creatures in the format. So, I don't know if you want to necessarily use that as an argument. But yeah, this card's crazy, and I'm going to be playing a lot of it, for sure. Again, mostly Pioneer, maybe some standard decks, some standard applications, because Thrill Seeker is also legal in Standard, so you can just do that in Standard too. So maybe I'll try a little bit with that. And now we get to number one. Given the cards that you've seen in this video, if you've gone through the whole video, you probably have an idea of what number one is. But it's a card that's probably one of, if not the most talked about card from the set, and that is Layline of the Guild Pact. So the mana cost here is obviously very strange. It's green-white hybrid, green-blue hybrid, black-green hybrid, and red-green hybrid. It's a Layline, so if it's in your opening hand, you can start the game with it on the battlefield. And then it has 2 lines of text. It says, each non-land permanent you control is all colors, and lands you control are every basic land type in addition to their other types. So this card has so many applications. So first of all, it's 4 green devotion. So with a card like Nykthos Shrine to Nyx, don't worry, I know Karn got banned, but Nykthos probably going to be making a comeback with this card. But it's 4 free green devotion, so you just imagine this. You just start with it on the battlefield, you play a forest and a Llanowar Elf, and then turn 2 you have a Nykthos. You can tap your forest and your elf to activate the Nykthos, and that's 5 green. What does 5 green cast? So that's the obvious application with devotion. The other, maybe not so apparent application is each non-land permanent you control is all colors. So Scion of Draco is a card that has seen stints in, has seen play in Modern. It still maybe sees a little bit of play today in the Zoo decks. But this card makes Scion absurd, because not only, regardless of the lands that you draw, they're all going to be all types. So you have just free domain on the house, on the spot. And because it makes all non-land permanents all colors, Scion of Draco is all colors. And Scion of Draco boosts itself. So you can have a Scion of Draco on turn 2 that has all 5 of its abilities, which is ridiculous, right? So, I mean, those are the 2 major applications. Obviously, it turns on Layline binding. It just, even the fact that it makes you not have to fetch is really cool, because you just don't, like, if your fetch lands, normally, like in a game of Modern, you start the game at, 16 or 15 from fetching. And if you have this, you just never have to fetch because you have all types anyways. Yeah, I don't know. This card just seems completely awesome. I think it's really good in Pioneer, really good in Modern. And, looking at this list, when I was doing the research for this video, I was pleasantly surprised at how many cards I think we'll see play in Modern. Now, granted, most of those are maybe not going to make as huge of an impact as I think they will. But this set seems really cool. There's a lot of stuff for a bunch of different formats, Standard, Modern, Pioneer, maybe even a little Timeless too, specifically with the bonus sheet like Show and Tell. I didn't want to go over the bonus sheet cards, just wanted to do the new cards, but yeah, there it is. That is the Murders of Karlov Manor video, top 10 plus honorable mentions. Please be sure to let me know in the comment section down below what you thought of the video, and I would like to hear from you guys too. What is your favorite card from the new set? What are you the most excited to see me play? What are you the most excited to play yourself? And with all of that said, thank you for watching, and I will see you in the next one. Bye-bye.